getting funding to Ukraine is a heavy lift all by itself. And so perhaps the thinking is that the extent to which we're able to do that heavy lift, maybe it could just lob on onto that. I hadn't heard that strategy, but I do think that the Baltimore Bridge really has an impact on not only local passenger traffic, but commerce. And so I know that it should be, it is a very high priority for everyone.
Well, Congresswoman, you just described Ukraine aid as a very heavy lift. We heard yesterday from some members on the Republican side that could be voted on next week. But given we also saw yesterday a rule failing again on the House floor, how confident are you, not just that this could be brought to the floor, but go anywhere at all?
Please, Kathy, don't ask me for confidence, because I don't have any confidence about anything that can happen in the House of Representatives. The margins are very, very narrow. I do know that there is a lot of support for Ukraine in both caucuses, and especially among Democrats. We do have a very lively caucus, I think, headed up by Marjorie Taylor Greene, that is against Ukraine aid. And if it comes to the floor, it will pass. So if a Republican has told you that we could be voting on it in a few weeks, I am sure that they have assessed and evaluated the Democratic support that may or may not be there. Now, they may bring it up on suspension, in which case that they could bypass the Rules Committee and they won't have to rely on Democratic votes to pass their rule. FISA came under a rule. So if it comes under suspension, they must have assessed that the votes were 2/3 of the House would vote for it, were it to come under suspension of the rules.
Speaking of that rule failing, we spoke with your colleague French Hill, the Republican from Arkansas, who's a champion of renewing FISA. He spoke with us shortly after that happened here on Bloomberg TV and radio and expressed his extreme disappointment. Here's what he told us, Congresswoman. We'll have you respond. Let's listen.
It's very frustrating today. This bill is important. A renewing 702 authority, which allows us to monitor communications from our adversaries outside the United States, not American citizens, It is non-negotiable. That has to be renewed before April 19th.
Congresswoman, as a progressive Democrat, do you want to see FISA renewed in its current form? Should a warrant be required if an American is involved in data collection?
Well, just let me just say that the bill that came to the floor that would have been, had we passed the rule, did have some reforms in it. So we are at risk of not having those reforms in it to protect American citizens. I think the Republicans listened to Donald Trump, who had a bone to pick with FISA, since he and his comrades who were engaged in conversations inappropriately with Russia were caught up in the FISA warrants. So I think that that he has personalized this and not looked at the broader need to make sure that our country is protected by our adversaries overseas. There were reforms that I agreed with, and perhaps we won't see those reforms if they have to come up with a near renewal.
Well, Congresswoman, as you bring up former President Donald Trump, it's worth noting that the House Speaker Mike Johnson will be alongside him tomorrow in a news conference at Mar-a-Lago in Florida, especially given all of the murmurs we have heard about potentially Democrats such as yourself stepping in to save the speaker should Marjorie Taylor Greene actually move on a motion to vacate the chair. Does his closeness with the former president change the calculation for Democrats? What do you think about whether you would ever cast a vote or just not vote at all to help save the speaker?
Well, I can tell you, as a person who's sick and tired of the impeachments and censorships and punishments, I can say that I'm very disappointed that he's going down there to kiss the ring on so-called election integrity, which is another Trump ruse for I gotta be elected, else I'm going to do January 6th all over again. I'm very disappointed that the speaker chose the path of going down to kiss the ring, as opposed to just working with the Democrats on avoiding the Marjorie Taylor Greene initiative to expel him. She wants to expel him because he cooperated with Democrats to keep the government from shutting down. And now, if he were to bring the Ukraine bill to the floor, she has threatened to do that. I hate to see the grand old party now becoming the party of Putin.
Well, with that said, Mike Johnson isn't exactly he's not exactly the normal kind of party goer at Mar-a-Lago. Congresswoman, what advice would you give the speaker before he flies to Palm Beach?
Well, bipartisanship is the only game in town. And he should lean into it and go down in history, as a speaker that saved the 118th Congress from being the worst Congress in history.
Well, and you mentioned, Congresswoman, the idea that he may be in hot water with his own party because he worked with yours to keep the government funded. If he were to work with Democrats in the House as well to make sure that Ukraine got funding, do you think it is likely that his speakership would remain intact due to Democratic action? Have you heard anything from Hakeem Jeffries about that idea?
Well, the person to hear from is Mike Johnson. Instead of flying down to Florida, why doesn't he walk across the hall and talk to Hakeem Jeffries? I just think that it's less time consuming and less expensive, and it's more integrity saving to do that.
Mm-hmm.